The entire base fell silent when Staff Sergeant Maria Ghost Rodriguez stepped forward and took the Barrett M82A1 from the trembling hands of Private Jenkins. Commander Jack Hawk Morrison froze, his weathered face going pale as he watched her smoothly cycle the bolt and adjust the Leopold scope with the precision of a master craftsman. Every SEAL in the courtyard snapped to attention, their eyes wide with recognition as they witnessed movements they'd only heard about in whispered legends from Fallujah and Kandahar. The woman they'd dismissed as just another maintenance tech was handling the .50 caliber sniper rifle like it was an extension of her own body. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning, to a humid Tuesday morning when everything changed at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The morning fog rolled off the Pacific as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stepped through the gates of NAB Coronado, her sea bag slung over one shoulder and her orders folded neatly in her breast pocket. At 5'4" and barely 125 pounds, she cut an unimpressive figure against the backdrop of towering SEALs jogging past in perfect formation. Her utilities were crisp but showed the faded patches where previous unit insignias had been removed, and her boots carried the scuff marks of someone who'd walked more miles than most people drove in a year. Commander Morrison barely glanced up from his morning briefing when she knocked on his office door. The silver-haired SEAL officer had commanded Team 7 for 3 years, and in that time, he'd grown accustomed to the parade of support personnel who rotated through his base. Rodriguez looked like every other maintenance tech who'd crossed his threshold, young, earnest, and completely out of place among his elite warriors. "Rodriguez, Maria, Staff Sergeant, reporting for armorer duty, sir," she said, her voice steady but soft. Her accent carried just a hint of her Texas roots, the kind of drawl that suggested Friday night football games and county fairs rather than covert operations and classified missions. Morrison signed her paperwork without really reading it, his mind already moving to the day's training schedule. "Chief Peterson will show you to the armory. Keep our weapons clean and functioning, Sergeant. That's all we need from you." He handed back her orders with the dismissive efficiency of a man who categorized people quickly and moved on. Rodriguez tucked the papers away and nodded. "Understood, sir. I won't let you down." As she left his office, Morrison was already forgetting her name. In his world, support personnel were interchangeable parts in a well-oiled machine. The real warriors, his SEALs, were preparing for deployment to Syria in 6 weeks. A maintenance tech, especially one who looked like she belonged in a college classroom rather than a military armory, was barely worth his attention. Chief Petty Officer Peterson met her at the armory, a cavernous building that housed everything from standard-issue M4s to specialized sniper systems. The grizzled veteran had 22 years in the Navy and had seen every type of armorer imaginable. Rodriguez struck him as competent but unremarkable as she methodically inventoried equipment and asked precise questions about maintenance schedules. "Most of the fancy stuff is off-limits to support personnel," Peterson explained, gesturing toward a locked cage containing the team's precision rifles. "SEALs maintain their own sniper systems. You stick to the basic infantry weapons and crew-served systems." Rodriguez nodded, but Peterson caught her eyes lingering on the Barrett M82A1 mounted in the specialized weapons rack. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Not curiosity, but recognition. The expression was gone so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined it. The first week passed quietly. Rodriguez arrived early, stayed late, and kept the armory running with mechanical precision. The SEALs barely acknowledged her presence as they drew weapons for training exercises. She was furniture, part of the background that kept their world functioning while they focused on the serious business of preparing for war. By the second week, subtle changes began to ripple through the team. Weapons that had been experiencing minor malfunctions suddenly ran flawlessly. The M240B machine guns that had been jamming during beach assault training now cycled perfectly through entire belt loads. Even the temperamental M32 grenade launchers were performing like they'd just rolled off the assembly line. Lieutenant Jake Viper Collins was the first to notice. The young SEAL officer had been struggling with his HK-416 during close-quarters battle drills, the rifle failing to extract spent casings consistently. After Rodriguez serviced it, the weapon ran through 500 rounds without a single malfunction. "She's good," Collins mentioned to his team leader, Petty Officer First Class Mike Diesel Thompson, as they cleaned their gear after a particularly grueling training exercise. Better than good, actually. I've never seen that 416 run this smooth. Thompson, a veteran of 4 deployments to Afghanistan, grunted his agreement. He'd watched Rodriguez work, noting how her hands moved with unconscious efficiency, how she could field strip and reassemble complex weapon systems without consulting technical manuals. There was muscle memory there, the kind that came from thousands of repetitions under stress. Commander Morrison remained oblivious to the undercurrents. His focus was laser-sharp on preparing his team for deployment, running them through complex scenarios that would test every aspect of their training. The armory was functioning better than it had in months, but he attributed that to normal military efficiency, rather than any particular skill from his new armorer. Rodriguez maintained her professional distance, speaking when spoken to but never offering opinions or insights that might reveal the depth of her knowledge. She wore her sleeves rolled down despite the California heat, and none of the SEALs thought to question why someone who worked in maintenance would be so meticulous about concealing her forearms. The breaking point came during a routine marksmanship training exercise. The team was zeroing their rifles at the 600-meter range when Private First Class Jenkins, their youngest member, experienced a catastrophic failure with his M110 semi-automatic sniper system. The rifle's bolt jammed solid, and in his inexperienced attempts to clear it, he'd managed to damage the firing pin. "God damn it, Jenkins!" Morrison's voice carried across the range like a whip crack. "That's a $20,000 weapon system, not a club." Rodriguez materialized at Peterson's shoulder as the chief examined the damaged rifle. Without being asked, she knelt beside the weapon and began a methodical inspection. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, identifying the problem in seconds. "Firing pin sheared at the collar," she said quietly. "Probably metal fatigue from the factory. The bolt face shows microfractures from repeated high-pressure cycles." She looked up at Peterson. "This wasn't user error, Chief. This was a manufacturing defect waiting to fail." Peterson stared at her for a long moment. In 2 sentences, she'd identified not just the immediate problem, but its root cause, demonstrating a level of expertise that typically took years to develop. "You sure about that diagnosis, Rodriguez?" "Positive, Chief. I've seen this exact failure before." She caught herself before saying more, but the damage was done. Peterson's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications of her statement. Commander Morrison approached, his face thunderous with barely controlled anger. The failed exercise had thrown off his entire training schedule, and now he was looking at hours of paperwork and equipment replacement procedures. "How long to get a replacement rifle, Chief?" 3 days minimum, sir. Maybe longer if supply doesn't have the part in stock." Morrison's jaw tightened. His team couldn't afford to lose 3 days of precision rifle training, not with deployment looming. He turned to Rodriguez, noting for the first time the calm competence in her dark eyes. "You seem to know something about this, Sergeant. Any bright ideas?" Rodriguez hesitated, clearly weighing her response. "I might be able to fabricate a temporary firing pin, sir. Get you through training until the replacement arrives." "Fabricate?" Morrison's tone sharpened. "This isn't some backyard project, Sergeant. We're talking about precision components machined to thousandths of an inch." "I understand, sir." Rodriguez's voice remained steady, but something in her posture had shifted, a subtle straightening that suggested coiled capability. "I've done field expedient repairs before. If you'll allow me to try, I can have the rifle operational within the hour." Morrison studied her for a long moment, his tactical mind weighing options. Pride warred with pragmatism, and pragmatism won. "Fine. But if you damage that rifle further, it's coming out of your hide. Chief Peterson will supervise." What happened in the next hour would be talked about in the Coronado Armory for years to come. Rodriguez worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, using tools and techniques that left Peterson speechless. She didn't just fabricate a firing pin, she improved on the original design, creating a component that was actually superior to the factory part. The rifle not only functioned flawlessly, but shot tighter groups than it ever had before. Jenkins, still shaky from his earlier mistake, managed to put 5 rounds into a 2-inch circle at 600 meters, the best shooting of his young career. Word spread through the team like wildfire. By evening chow, every SEAL on base had heard about the maintenance miracle Rodriguez had performed. But it was Lieutenant Collins who asked the question that had been nagging at everyone. "Where exactly did you learn to do that, Sergeant?" Rodriguez deflected with practiced ease, claiming she'd picked up machining skills during previous assignments. But her answers were vague, and the SEALs were trained to notice evasion. The woman who cleaned their weapons and organized their equipment was becoming an enigma, wrapped in utilities and regulation boots. The crisis that would force everything into the open came 3 days later during a live-fire exercise. The team was conducting a complex scenario involving close air support, direct action, and precision elimination of high-value targets. The exercise was designed to simulate the kind of operation they'd face in Syria, complete with time pressure and cascading complications. Everything went wrong at once. The first indication of trouble came when the simulated enemy began accurate counterfire from positions that should have been suppressed. Lieutenant Collins, acting as the team's designated marksman, was engaging targets at 800 meters when his scope mount failed catastrophically. The Leopold optic separated from the rifle mid-shot, sending his round wide and leaving the team exposed. "Scope failure!" Collins shouted over the radio. "I'm down!" Commander Morrison felt his chest tighten as the exercise began to unravel. Without precision fire support, his team was pinned down by enemy positions they couldn't effectively engage with their shorter-range weapons. In a real operation, this would be a catastrophic failure with potentially fatal consequences. "Exercise control. This is Bravo 7, Morrison spoke into his radio. "Request halt to exercise for equipment failure." "Negative Bravo 7. Exercise continues. Enemy forces are reinforcing. You have 12 minutes to complete primary objectives or mission failure." Morrison's mind raced through options. 12 minutes wasn't enough time to get Collins back in the fight with a replacement optic. The backup sniper rifle was in the armory, but by the time someone retrieved it, the exercise would be over. His team's perfect training record was about to take a devastating hit just weeks before deployment. That's when Rodriguez appeared. She'd been observing the exercise from the safety area, officially there to provide immediate armorer support if needed. But as Morrison watched in amazement, she was already moving toward the backup Barrett M82A1 that lay unused on the equipment table. Her movements were fluid, purposeful, and completely at odds with her official role as a maintenance technician. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Morrison demanded. Rodriguez looked up at him, and for the first time since her arrival, he saw past the carefully maintained facade. Her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who'd faced real bullets and real consequences. "Requesting permission to provide precision fire support, sir." Morrison almost laughed. The suggestion was absurd. Rodriguez was support personnel, not a trained sniper. The Barrett 50 caliber rifle was one of the most powerful and complex weapons in the military arsenal, requiring years of training to master. "Sergeant, that's not your—" "Sir." Rodriguez's voice cut through his objection with quiet authority. "Your team needs precision fire. I can provide it." The exercise clock was ticking. Morrison looked at the Barrett, then at Rodriguez, then at his pinned-down team. Military doctrine said he should call a halt to the exercise. Common sense said that a maintenance tech couldn't possibly handle one of the most demanding weapon systems in the inventory. But something in Rodriguez's eyes made him hesitate. It was the same look he'd seen in the faces of his best operators, the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. "You have any idea what you're asking, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir. I do." Morrison made a decision that would haunt and inspire him in equal measure. "Do it." Rodriguez moved to the Barrett with the fluid grace of someone returning home. She performed a functions check in seconds, her hands moving over the massive rifle with intimate familiarity. The weapon weighed 30 pounds and kicked like a mule, but she shouldered it like it was a natural extension of her body. Through his binoculars, Morrison watched her settle into position behind the scope. The targets were at extreme range, over 200 meters, requiring precise calculation of windage, elevation, and atmospheric conditions. Even his best snipers needed several minutes to make those calculations. Rodriguez took 30 seconds. Her first shot thundered across the range, the massive 50 BMG round creating a sound like God's own hammer striking an anvil. Downrange, the first target exploded in a shower of debris. Before the echo of the first shot had faded, She was cycling the bolt and acquiring her second target. Shot after shot rang out with mechanical precision. Each pull of the trigger sent a 750-grain projectile screaming downrange at over 2,800 feet per second, and each round found its mark with devastating accuracy. Targets that had been pinning down his team disappeared one by one, eliminated with surgical precision that left Morrison speechless. In less than 4 minutes, Rodriguez had single-handedly cleared every enemy position within a kilometer of the exercise area. The suppressing fire that had been devastating his team simply stopped, erased by a display of marksmanship that bordered on the supernatural. "Exercise control, this is Bravo 7. Morrison spoke into his radio, his voice hoarse with amazement. "All primary objectives eliminated. Mission complete." The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez was still behind the Barrett when the exercise controllers arrived to verify the results. The smoking brass scattered around her position told the story of sustained precision fire, but it was the target assessment that left everyone stunned. 12 targets eliminated at ranges from 800 to 1,247 meters, with an average group size of less than 2 inches. Commander Morrison approached slowly, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he said carefully, "I think it's time we had a talk." She rose from the firing position, the Barrett still smoking in her hands. For the first time since her arrival, she met his gaze directly, and Morrison saw something that made his chest tighten with recognition. Those weren't the eyes of a maintenance technician. Those were the eyes of a warrior. "Yes, sir," she said simply. "Let's start with the obvious question. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Rodriguez set the Barrett carefully in its rack before answering. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before, as if she'd decided to stop hiding behind her careful facade. "Kandahar Province, sir. Helmand, Fallujah, Mosul." Each name dropped like a stone into still water. 37 confirmed kills over 4 deployments. Scout Sniper, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. Call sign, Ghost. The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. Every special operations warrior in the military knew about Ghost, the legendary Marine sniper who'd terrorized Taliban commanders across Afghanistan. The sniper who'd held the record for the longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history, until it was broken just last year. The operator who'd disappeared from the operational world as suddenly and mysteriously as she'd appeared. "You're Ghost," Morrison whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. Rodriguez nodded once. "These days I'm just Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, armorer." Chief Peterson had approached during the exchange, and now his face was pale with understanding. "Ma'am, I need to ask, why didn't you identify yourself when you arrived?" Rodriguez's smile was tired, carrying the weight of decisions made and prices paid. "Because I requested this assignment specifically, Chief. After my last deployment, I needed time away from the trigger. Maintenance seemed like a good way to stay close to the community without having to take lives." Morrison's mind was reeling as he processed the implications. The woman who'd been quietly servicing their weapons for 2 weeks was one of the most decorated snipers in modern military history. The unassuming maintenance tech was a living legend who'd chosen anonymity over recognition. "Your record," Morrison said slowly. "It's classified higher than my clearance level. How do you just disappear from that world?" "You request it, sir, and you accept that most people will never know what you've done." Rodriguez's voice was matter-of-fact, but Morrison caught the underlying sadness. "Sometimes the weight of what you're good at becomes too heavy to carry." I needed to remember that there were other ways to serve. Lieutenant Collins had joined the growing circle of listeners, his young face showing a mixture of awe and confusion. "But ma'am, your skills, the Corps must need operators like you." "The Corps needs operators, Lieutenant, but operators need to be whole human beings, not just killing machines." Rodriguez looked at each of them in turn. "I spent 4 years behind a scope, watching the world through crosshairs. I needed to remember what it felt like to build things instead of destroying them." Morrison found himself struggling with emotions he couldn't name. Respect certainly, but also something deeper. Recognition of a warrior's sacrifice that went far beyond anything he'd understood before. Ghost had walked away from a legendary career not because she'd failed, but because she'd succeeded too well. "Why reveal yourself now?" he asked. Rodriguez glanced toward the range where his team was still conducting their debrief. "Because your men needed what I could provide, sir, and because hiding behind my limitations was preventing me from serving them properly." Chief Peterson cleared his throat, his weathered face showing uncharacteristic emotion. "Ma'am, if I may, what you did today, that wasn't just shooting, that was artistry." Rodriguez actually laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed her face completely. "Chief, I appreciate the sentiment, but what I did today was use a tool I'm familiar with to solve a problem. Nothing more, nothing less." But Morrison knew better. He'd seen artistry before, in the fluid movements of his best operators, in the split-second decisions that separated success from catastrophe. What Rodriguez had demonstrated wasn't just skill, it was mastery refined by thousands of hours of practice and hardened by real-world consequences. "What happens now, Sergeant?" Morrison asked. "Do you want to return to operational status?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I don't know, sir. For the first time in 2 years, I don't know." She looked at him directly. "What I do know is that your team is heading into harm's way and they deserve every advantage they can get. If my skills can help keep them alive, then maybe it's time to stop hiding from what I am." Morrison felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that the woman standing before him represented everything he'd spent his career trying to build in his own men. She was competent, selfless, and possessed of a moral courage that had led her to sacrifice personal recognition for the greater good. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said formally, "would you consider accepting a temporary assignment as our precision marksmanship instructor?" Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, it reached her eyes. "I'd be honored, sir." As word spread through the base over the following days, the story of the unassuming armorer who'd turned out to be a legendary sniper became the stuff of military folklore. But for Morrison, the real lesson was simpler and more profound. In a world where everyone wanted to be recognized for their achievements, he'd met someone whose greatest achievement had been the wisdom to walk away when walking away was the hardest thing to do. The Barrett 50 still sat in its rack in the armory, but now when Rodriguez cleaned it, every SEAL who watched understood they were witnessing something rare, a master craftsman caring for the tool that had made her legendary. And in accepting her help, Morrison had learned something that would change how he led for the rest of his career. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. Staff Sergeant Maria "Ghost" Rodriguez had found her way back to the community she'd served, not through the crosshairs of a scope, but through the quiet dignity of service without recognition. And in doing so, she'd reminded everyone who witnessed it that true warriors aren't defined by the battles they fight, but by the wisdom to choose when fighting is necessary and when it's time to build something better. The morning fog still rolled off the Pacific each day at Nab Coronado, but now it revealed a base where a legend walked among them, teaching and learning in equal measure, proving that sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to holster your weapon and extend your hand instead.